Okay, good. Okay, guys, you're all very welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shane Murphy. I'm Technical and Sales Director at Ashgrove Renewables. I'm joined today by my colleague, John Allen.
Thank you.
John is sitting here to my right-hand side. He'll be keeping an eye on questions coming in, and he'll be talking to us about various parts of the presentation here. Okay, so we'll start away. I suppose the purpose of these presentations, we're doing them for domestic solar as well. We're doing them for home energy upgrades. We're doing them maybe for exhaust air heat pumps or anything where we feel that people can get useful information. It's not really about sales here today. Obviously, we're a commercial entity and we want sales ultimately, but these talks really are matter of fact, black and white, facts and figures talks. We hope they're of use to you. For anybody in the who needs CPD points, make sure that you make contact with us afterwards and we'll send you through your certs. And on top of that, anybody who would need maybe further training, like at the end of the day, this is a kind of a 45, 50-minute talk, and we're having to cover everything from kind of entry-level solar knowledge right up to something that is meaty for those of you who are maybe slightly more or maybe significantly more knowledgeable. So anyway, we'll try to cover as much as we can. So a tiny bit, we're going to be covering the solar basics. We won't really be talking about domestic, it'll be commercial and industrial, so slightly larger systems. We'll talk about costs and payback in Ireland. We'll talk about the grant a little bit, the designing of your system. We'll talk about the inverters. We won't go into the workings of the inverters, but we'll talk maybe about the two basic types. Battery types and sizes. Where would I use a battery? Why should I maybe not use a battery, or where is it beneficial and where is it only extra cost without additional savings maybe? And then maybe attaching to roof or ground mounting in some cases. So a tiny bit about Ashgrove. We're in business since 2001. We're specializing in renewable energy since then. We first installed solar in 2001. There was probably a period in between where it all slowed down a little bit, but obviously for the last 5 or 7 years it's back up and running again in earnest, and very popular, of course, over the last 2 or 3 years. We're a registered one-stop shop. That's not important, I suppose, for what we're talking about today. One-stop shop, for any of you who are not maybe in that part of the sector, is to do with home energy upgrades and all of the SEI grants that go with it. We won't be talking about it today. We're also a Premier Bord Gáis solar installer. So this is, I think the last I heard, there are 3, maybe 4 companies who are registered with Bord Gáis to install their larger systems. And then I suppose over the last 22 or 3 years, we've about 18,000 systems installed around Ireland and the UK. Now, yes, and they range in size from quite small up to very large systems in the kind of 2 megawatt range, I think is the largest. Last year we did about 1,800 projects. These webinar series, I would say probably 10 to 15% of them are for professionals like yourselves. And I'll show you maybe the calendar for the rest of the year. But there's about 200 webinars or seminars over the year. They're all free. They're non-salesy. They're there for information to help people and I suppose dispel some of the poor information that we hear all the time, or those myths, and I suppose just get more science-based information into the sector, or especially when we're facing Joe Public. They're reliant on sometimes poor information and it leads to bad decisions. So you can fire the questions in a way at the bottom. John will keep an eye on them, and we'll either answer them as we're going, or we'll answer them at the end if they're not relevant at the particular slide that I'm on. So a tiny bit about Ashgrove. I won't hang on this, only we do solar PV, domestic and non-domestic, air-to-water heat pumps. Ground source heat pumps are making a bit of a comeback. For various reasons, not all of them correct, but we're getting more and more interest in it again. Exhaust air heat pumps for smaller projects, Obviously won't be talking about any of these guys. We do a lot underfloor heating and cooling being becoming popular because of houses or buildings overheating, so we can cool through the floors. Again, we won't be talking about it today. Energy upgrades, insulation, windows, doors, ventilation, etc. And then lastly, grants. So we specialize in ones. We are one of, I think, 18 one-stop shops in the country. We do probably 50% of our home upgrade projects do not pass through the one-stop shop because they're not really suited to it. So instead, they would pass through the CEG, the Community Energy Grants. And then, of course, you still have the Better Energy Homes, which we always had, being a slightly less lucrative grant mechanism. And then, of course, what we're discussing today, commercial solar PV. And we'll talk about the grants probably 3/4 of the way through, and the values, etc., etc. So all of what we've just discussed there is available on our app. Our app is called whatgrant.ie. The only thing that isn't on that actually is what we're covering today, believe it or not, commercial solar. But for any engineer or BER assessor architect who wants the information, it's kind of 2 or 3 minute or 5 minute clips. Why would I use this grant? Why would I not maybe use this grant more importantly sometimes? And that you can pass that grant or that information onto your customer. And again, we're not in sales mode there. It's really about getting information out there and dispelling common myths. Where do you guys fit in? I suppose, look, the usual. We're here, I suppose, as a help to desk for you. We're not trying to sell. We're result focused. If an inquiry comes in here, we know that you need a result. You don't need spinning of wheels and talk and whatever and nothing coming out the far side. We know that you need either a project out or information for your client or information maybe for yourself or whatever it is. So, you know, we're a solutions company. We're not a sales company, and that's what we aim to be, to assist you in doing your work as such. So again, not relevant for today. We have 5 in-house BER assessors. We have NZIB qualified people. That's more to do with ventilation, etc. But I suppose our promise, I suppose, is for your projects to deliver good value for money for your clients. It to be simple. I mean, the product is probably only 50% of a project these days. It's about health and safety. It's about I suppose good communication that is timely, you know, it's not a case that you're hoping for a call back. You know, once you put the project into our system that, you know, you'll be getting called and it'll come out the far side. Some of you will have already been working within that and you'll be well familiar with the systems. So quick turnaround on all paperwork and certificates, and we have a strong after sales division. So and again, we have free and regular information events for you and your clients. Again, as I said, over 200 of them this year. So look, quick view of projects. We have projects there going from hotels, very large houses, you know, 60,000 square foot house there, top right, you know, and very large heat pump systems up to kind of, again, 2 megawatts. Water source heat pumps. We're taking heat from rivers and lakes and running them off of wind turbines or whatever it is. Very sophisticated systems. Why do we show you these? None of these are showing solar panels for 3 reasons. Number one, we're a technical company, and we have been since the very beginning. Number two, I suppose that there's a strong project management element to what we do, and any of those projects there that you see, all of those projects are, well, the left-hand one and the bottom one are, you know, the left-hand one is a £2 million project in the UK. The bottom one is £1 million project again in northern or western Scotland, and so on. These are significant projects. So, and the last thing I suppose is that all of these projects require strong QA. So from start to finish, it's checklist, and so you're guaranteed the outcome. So that's really all we're saying when we show you those, and that's it. So we won't talk about anything else about Ashgrove. Today we're looking at solar energy. This is a snapshot from our website. We're looking at solar energy, and in very simple terms, we're still getting people confused about solar photovoltaic. That's where we're producing electricity, whether it's into a home or a business or an industrial setting. We can use that electricity to do whatever, run a heat pump, produce hot water, run a compressor, do whatever it is. And if you have excess, we can either put it into a battery or export it onto the grid and get credit for it. What we often hear referred to as solar panels, we would refer to as solar thermal, where we're producing hot water directly. We would have seen these more maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. There would be very few cases today where solar thermal is the best option. There are cases where it might be, maybe as we say there, heating swimming pools and so on. But pound for pound or square meter per square meter, photovoltaic is almost always more advantageous. And then lastly, we have solar thermodynamic. This is where it's essentially a heat pump, but we don't have the fan, and it is sitting on the roof facing the sun. Again, for hot water or something like that, it's more suited. But you know, if you've heated up your hot water and your tank is full, well, then the solar thermodynamic panel can do no more for the day, and it just sits doing nothing. So whereas the solar photovoltaic can keep, you know, has other options, and the last one of them being to export surplus onto the grid and get credit for it. So all we're discussing today is that top one, and I'm not going to go into how a panel actually functions in terms of what happens within the silicon wafers. But suffice to say, unless somebody has other questions, that when photons of electricity hit that panel, that you get, ultimately, you get DC current coming out the cable here at the end, okay? That DC current in a domestic setting is unusable in that state. So we need to pass it through a thing called an inverter. And that inverter changes it from AC to DC. Sorry, the other way around, apologies, DC to AC. And alternating current then is what we get out of our sockets, or what we get to run compressors, etc., for the most part. So, there are two types of inverters there. We'll be talking about it as we go. For those of you who are not too familiar with it, a standard inverter that we would have in a house is called a string inverter. The string inverter is the simplest type, where we don't have a battery, and what it does, what it I suppose it does what I just described. I suppose it changes from direct current to alternating current, but there is no excess. There's no storage possibility for excess electricity. So if we do want a battery, or if we're ever considering a battery, we would put in a hybrid inverter. And that hybrid inverter, depending on the size, slightly more expensive, but yeah, unless you have a battery, it doesn't do anything extra for you. Okay, so I'm going to skip on here. So a simple scenario here might be a commercial scenario where I have 100 panels, 200 panels, 300 panels, whatever it is, sitting on a rooftop or a field or whatever it is. That direct current comes into an inverter, or a number of inverters, depending, and it comes out then, and it goes into, I suppose, your fuse board or your consumer board. And if the building isn't consuming electricity, then that electricity gets redirected back out on through your smart meter, where you get credit for exporting it, and that goes off into the grid, and you know, it's somebody else ends up consuming it. But if we have a battery, it sits connected to that inverter, provided it's hybrid, and that battery, we would say probably in a lot of commercial or industrial cases, batteries are hard to justify due to the size of the loads and the size the battery would need to be. So yeah, I would say probably in 20% of cases, a battery is worthwhile. That might be counterintuitive, but we go into the science of it there shortly, and we'll see maybe why. If you have any questions on that, as I say, throw them in there to the Q&A box. So I just wanted to, before we go any further, make a point here. A lot of people would ask all the time, whether it's in domestic or commercial settings, think that my house isn't directly south facing. What is the impact on efficiency? Well, we use this graph quite often for the simple reason it's very simple to understand, or very intuitive. if I have a solar panel and it's number one south facing, so this is the south facing line here, and if it's at we'll call it 35 degrees of a pitch, so this would be maybe normal domestic, so that's 10, 20, 30 and 35. We can see here if my house is south facing and my pitch is 35, I'm in the middle of this red box, which is 100% efficiency to 95. Now that's 100% efficiency for what? For the panel. And as I start rotating that panel then away towards, in this case, the east, you can see I'm moving now outside of the 100 to 95% category, down into the 90%, down into the 80%, etc. But if I go fully east, which a lot of people would expect is kind of catastrophic in terms of output, okay, I'm in this the middle of this yellow box now, which is 80 to 85. So if I'm fully east at 35 degrees of a roof pitch, I'm at 82 or 83% efficiency for that panel. Now, there, of course, the various panels have different efficiencies as well. But broadly speaking, the point there is it is not catastrophic to be facing east or west. Even if you can see here, if the panel is lying down flat, facing straight up at the sky, you know, you're gone. In this case, it doesn't matter what the orientation is, you're just pointing up. While you're inside in this, you're gone outside of the orange and you're into this, whatever that is, mauve or something, but you're between 85 and 90%. So that's not a catastrophic outcome either. And so the point being, if you had a flat roof and you had it at a 10-degree pitch or something like this, well, you know, you're shoving on for 90% efficiency. Okay. So that's that. Okay. So if we have a customer, I suppose, what is it they need from us? Or sorry, the other way around. What do we need from them? So we're trying to figure out, number one, I suppose it all comes back to payback, obviously. And we ask, well, number one, where are you? In the, presumably Ireland for today. The next thing we need is energy usage, right? That's an obvious enough one. We want to know whether they're paying for 50,000 kilowatt hours or 500,000 kilowatt hours. And as important, if not more important, the consumption profile. We'll talk about that in great detail, and because it has a big impact on the sizing of the panels, the requirement for batteries, or indeed whether maybe the project might be suited to solar panels at all. The next thing is the MIC, the maximum import capacity, right? It doesn't really have a lot to do with the solar doesn't need an import capacity, but it might tell us a lot about the export capacity. So for example, if a small factory had a 50 kilowatt import capacity because they don't, you know, they have lighting and they have office space or whatever, but just say they had a huge roof and they wanted to put in 200 kilowatts of solar up on the roof. Well, they have a cable that's coming in that's big enough to bring in 50 kilowatts. It may not be big enough to take out 200 kilowatts. Now the next figure should tell us that, but not a lot of people would know it, the maximum export capacity. We can check that on your behalf, or you can check it. So the next question after those first few important ones is load shifting possible? Sometimes we have people who have large amounts of energy use, and they might at the moment be running compressors or whatever it is by night because it's cheaper. And it's possible to shift that load today. If you were getting free electricity, they could easily shift it. Other people would have loads then where, look, there's people in the office, they need heating or they need cooling or whatever it is. There's no shifting that to tomorrow or whatever it is. It's just not possible to shift that load. That comes into it. It's probably useful in 20% of cases. And then something that comes in obviously would be, okay, we've designed an array of panels for the roof, whether it's 100 kilowatts or 500 kilowatts. Well, will the roof take the weight of it? And so next thing you're into getting engineers involved. But that's further down the road, and we're into the real nuance there. And for today, I suppose we're only interested in the top bit and how we design it, what the prices are, etc. So the first thing is, as we say, you know, a factory rings or a whatever it is, a creamery or a shop, commercial setup, you know, I'm using 50,000 kilowatt hours a year, or I'm using 500, or I'm using 5 million kilowatt hours a year. Okay, that doesn't tell me anything other than it's an amount. Is that largely, as you can see here, is it in like this, January, February, March, and it's starting to drop away in summer, and then it rises again in winter. So this might look like something like a heating load. So it's largely in winter they're using energy. And that would tell us maybe, okay, they're using a lot of energy, but solar being largely stacked towards summer might not be the thing here. So it's very important we understand the 12-month profile. And then the next thing we need to understand is, I suppose, the 7-day profile. So if this is a factory or an office, it might only be Monday to Friday, and Saturday and Sunday is doing nothing. So we need to understand that. And lastly, we need to understand this 24-hour profile. And when we talk about 24-hour profiles, it's easier to talk maybe about a domestic case because we can all understand it. You know, I suppose the next one would be something like my house, whereas I leave in the morning, I go to work, and then during the day, really there isn't much energy usage, but the solar starts to get really busy and producing. And you can see there that anything between those two graphs now is surplus, and I either have to store it or export it. So that on the right-hand side might be something like Shane's house, right? Whereas something like this on the left might be a typical office where people come in the morning at 8 or 9 o'clock, they start consuming through the day, and the solar is busy at the same time. So we can see there intuitively that on the left, we might, unless we have a large excess of electricity here between the demand and the supply, we either export it or we store it in a battery. But in the case in the left, I suppose it's the same thing. We've a surplus here, but I'm in this case, unless I store it, I'm not getting use of it here in the evening. So it changes our thinking. So we're looking at the ideal scenario for solar being a scenario like this. This is a project we did a while back. But it's about 200,000 kilowatt hours per annum. We still know nothing, of course, just by that figure, because that could be the very same every month. It could be stacked towards winter because it's a heating load. In this case, it's a cooling load, right? So you can see there it's growing in the summer, as we would expect when it's warmer and sunnier. Okay, and our solar would be something, our solar load, our solar production would pretty much mirror that. So we'd like to see a load like this. What we don't, sorry, when I say we don't like to see it, it doesn't suit solar is what I'm saying there. So if we saw something like this, which was all heating, right? As an example, you can see here that what we would expect from solar might be a graph that's peaking in summer. And so in this case, we might say, okay, if we started to see this, we'd run it into our software, which we will see in a second, but we would end up exporting a lot of excess electricity, and it increases the payback period. Okay, so when the customer would come to us, we would try to get the information in as granular a format as we could. We would love to get it by the month. Would be, I suppose, at this scale is the least we need. Ideally, it's by the week, or ideally by the day or by the hour. But look, we'll work with whatever we get at the same time. So in an ideal scenario in summer, you can see here that the solar is starting to get busy around 7 o'clock in the morning, and ideally the load is slightly more. And again, it's a daytime load and drops off at 9 o'clock at night. And so all of that solar is consumed, and there's essentially no export. In the ideal scenario in winter, obviously the load is still what it was, but you're getting less from your solar. That's it should be obvious. Every now and then, we don't hear as much of it these days. A year or two ago, we were hearing about solar people or solar sales people telling the public that we actually don't need sunlight. We just need daylight, kind of, just we don't need direct sun, I suppose. It's not true. Obviously, on a day like today, depending on where you are, it's relatively overcast. Your solar will be producing probably around 30% today of what it will be on a sunny day. And but we tend not to hear that as much as we were 2 or 3 years ago, thankfully. In a non-ideal scenario, we call this a nighttime load. So this might be a heating load, or who knows what it is, where the electricity is being used by night and dropping by day. And again, the solar is busy by day. So we're trying to get an understanding of this early on, talking to the customer. Sometimes they think we're asking for too much information. The simple thing might actually be just give them a price and, whatever. But we need to be able to stand over the system and say, if we're telling them that it's a 2.7 or a 3.6 year payback, we need to be able to stand over that. Okay, so it starts with the bill. We get in this customer's bill, wherever it is. It says here the MIC, and then we go into the energy units, or the kilowatt hours per month. And I'll show you then what we do with that. So, but importantly here is the MIC. It still doesn't mention the MEC, and we would have to inquire about that. But you can see here, that's quite a big system. So if it's able to bring in 340 kVA, it'll be able to take out 340 kVA. At least it can, I suppose, in terms of the infrastructure. The question will have to come at some point, will they allow us to put out 340 kVA? Because if there was 10 other factories in your industrial estate, well, all of a sudden, there's a huge surge of electricity, because everybody will have presumably the excess of electricity at the same time on really sunny days, on maybe a Saturday or Sunday where none of them are there, and they're putting out a huge amount of excess power onto the grid. The grid may simply not be able to take it. So if we're putting out a large amount of electricity like that, we have to ask, is the grid capable of taking it? And you apply for a license. We'll talk about it as we go on. So for the moment, all we're interested in is the kilowatt hours. And then I'm just going to start a quick video here. And what we do with that is we're going to put in the monthly consumption from each of the bills there. We can put it in as, if we don't know information, we can take our best guess at it. But ideally, we put in what we consume in January, February, March. I'm just going to skip on. You can see the idea of it there, right? And from that, it generates a graph, no rocket science so far. And we will then go into what sort of project we're dealing with. Is it a business? Is it a creamery? Is it for example, maybe a farm that has a spike morning and evening when they're milking, or something like this? And we try, by the way, this software is, I won't say basic, but is relatively basic when it comes down to that very nuanced daily load. So we use something more sophisticated. So when we, in this case, are dropping solar panels, as you'll see here in 2 seconds, onto the roof of this building, you can see here that as I drop on more solar panels, the amount of kilowatt hours that are being produced. Now this building is in Mallow, and you can see here in 2 seconds, it'll have recalculated the amount of energy that's now going to be produced by that solar panel. So it's after jumping there to 123,000 kilowatt hours per year. So we know where on the planet it is. We know the orientation, that it's south facing or whatever it is. And then lastly, we know the angle of the roof, and that tells us everything else. So by the way, this software is accepted by some of the banks who are looking at this as an asset. So this is a sophisticated piece of software that is well trusted and has been well scrutinized. So we're happy to stand over it as well. So you can see here now, we're recalculating again, and you can see here that the consumption pattern has been put in, the production pattern has been put in. We've told it that we do or don't have batteries, and what it's actually going to tell us then is how much of that we are going to self-consume and how much of it we're going to export. So that will be the next thing we look at in the next charts. So I've taken a snippet here from a scenario here where we've, as we said, a 200,000 kilowatt hour annual demand. The solar in this case is producing 131,000 kilowatt hours for us. And you can see here on no day other than a few blips are we, well, sorry, all we can say there is per month that we're not generating that we're not producing what we need. But there will be days, maybe Saturday and Sunday, as I say, where There's nothing being consumed, but we are producing. We will be exporting on that day. Now, this graph does not show us this, right? But this does, right? So we're exporting in this scenario 29% to the grid. We are self-consuming 71%. When we see it up around 71%, we know that that's a decent result. For domestic, we would rarely see it that high because the energy consumption would be higher in winter than it would be in summer, whereas this factory here, when we're dealing with refrigeration, would be well suited. We could actually go bigger here with the solar panels and we would get more self-consumption, but we would also get more export. Now, percentages mightn't change a lot, but your bills would come down, I suppose. So in this case, the system cost from Ashgrove anyway is 140,000. The SEI grant, I'll look at that in a second where that comes from, is 34,600, and the payback here is 3 years. Okay, so if that was slightly less ideal now, so we're going to look at a scenario that he's not. Let's call it an abattoir type load. So the load is in not in summer, would be like this next one. So the load is, let's call it a heating load. So it'll be higher in winter than it is in summer. And we get this sort of a profile, higher in January, February, March, and again in November, December, whereas the solar, quite obviously, intuitively, we can all know that our 200 kilowatt system is going to look something like this. It's going to be higher in summer than it is in winter. So again here now, so you can see we're exporting more. That's obvious, right? So we're going to get paid for it, but we're going to get paid for it at maybe half of the price that we'd be buying it at. And you can see here, our self-consumption has gone down to 52% and our export is 48%. Our payback, by the way, is still not catastrophic. It's 3.59 years. So that's still good. Now, if this load that we're looking at was all nighttime, right? Well, that would be a different story. We'd now need big batteries to store the electricity by day and keeping it until nighttime. Well, then the cost of this goes up, right? The grant doesn't go up because it's per kilowatt hour, and this payback might go to whatever, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, or maybe even to 10 years. And in some cases, you just say solar is simply not suited here. Okay. Are we covering those questions, Johnny? I think we are. Okay. So the grants for non-domestic. So domestic is up until 6 kilowatts. We don't need to cover below that today. But from 7 kilowatts up, we can send you this afterwards anyway. But to give you an idea, 100 kilowatt system power or peak is 22 grand. If you'll be up to, we got those.
That's the individuals on the right hand side. So the left is just some samples. So it's correct. 100 and 2 megawatt there on the bottom left.
Okay, so look, the smaller ones here are the same as the domestic grants were up until they were changed 6 months ago, start of the year. Yeah. So 2.4, the domestic up to that size is 2,100 euro, and then from 7 kilowatts to 20, you're getting 300 per kilowatt. From 21 to 200, as you can read there, is 200 and so on. So, but probably more importantly, like we would see for a lot of projects that they're probably falling into the 50 to 200 or 300 kilowatt system or that bracket, and the grants there are from 22 to 60,000. Okay. So then, John, do you want to talk about that bit?
So just going back to the grants are actually linked to the size of the panel system that you put on. So you don't have to put on a 300 kilowatt inverter for 300 kilowatt panels. It's recommended that you put on a smaller inverter. All those inverters can typically take 150% of the load. So for a 300 kilowatt system, you might put a 200 kilowatt inverter. So the grant you're getting for that is a 300 based on 300 kilowatts. However, your inverter size is only 200 kilowatts, and this ESB connections is completely separate to your SEI grants. And this is seeing our ESB happy with you connecting this side of system to their grid. So there's a number of I suppose, different scenarios depending on the size of the system you're putting in. So NC6 is the smallest. There's no cost with that, and it's kind of almost taken for granted that it's approved. That's for 6 kilowatts in single phase and 11 kilowatts in 3-phase. So if you're putting on an inverter that's smaller than either of those two figures, your NC6 covers you, and it's kind of taken for granted that you get approval for that. NC7 then is going into the bigger system, so it's 17 kilowatts for single phase and 15 kilowatts or 50 kilowatts for 3-phase. It's technically kVA, but for the purpose of this, we'd assume that 1 kilowatt is the same as a kVA. There's a charge that goes with this. It's €977 to apply for this, and there's an 8 to 10 week turnaround on getting approval for this. If you're going bigger than your 50 kilowatts in 3-phase, you're up to anything up to 200 kilowatts is in the NC8 scale. So NC5 is for non-inverter driven ones, so not anything to do with solar. So NC8 would be where you'd be applying for if you were going anything more than 50 kilowatts in 3-phase and lower than 200 kilowatts. There's a charge with this as well. It's about €1,250. And again, with NC7 and NC8, ESB are running, I suppose, calculations, testing the grid, Shane spoke about earlier, to see can the grid take the amount of electricity that this system will be putting on. So all boxes that need to be ticked, there's a time scale involved in them, and there's a financial investment involved with them as well. But it's something that I suppose we're quite familiar with in here, and there's also a number of I suppose direct routes into the SB which we can use to see if we can if this is likely or less likely to get approved. So yeah, that's kind of the different approvals. Again, it's completely separate to the grants. You could be approved for grants and ESB could shoot you down, or vice versa. Well, it's very unlikely that you won't be approved for grants, to be fair. SEAI are very keen to get these commercial solar up on rooftops. They've kind of nearly removed all obstacles for it. No matter what type of building it is, they'll give you a grant for it. So yeah, it's another hoop just that you have to be aware of in order to get before you start installing.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. So then we'll come back to planning in a second, and what's involved in it. But I'll just give you some examples of how it ends up being installed, especially when it's at the scale we're talking about here. So it might be ground mounted. There are various types of ways of putting it onto the ground. In this case, it's ground screws. It gets screwed in either with a machine on the back of a JCB, which threads that down into the soil, or there's also a slightly less sophisticated machine. It's a kind of a handheld device with a long arm that gives you a bit of leverage, I suppose, but you can thread it down, and they would look something like this. You can envisage that thing there is 1.5 meters or 2 meters tall. It's a big thing, and onto the top of that you can see your little holes here which accept the next stuff that we're looking at. So the bottom holes here line up with the top holes here, and ultimately you get what you see here at the bottom. So you can see that one there is slightly off center. Maybe, well, I certainly can, maybe you can't at your side, but there's a bit of forgiveness in that if necessary. So that's what that looks like. It's that's relatively cheap way of installing the ground mounted system. A more sophisticated, more expensive way, and typically only done in smaller scale, would be to put a concrete pad under it. And I suppose the environmental side of that as well is taken into account in many cases. So that's what we call the ground mounting. Here's what it would look like in a small case on a ground mounting. So you can see here, there's a lot of concrete just sitting there. As such, it's just nearly ballast. So there's a lot of stuff there that has to be done. And you can imagine if that's a 200 or 300 kilowatt system, there's a lot of concrete that really is doing nothing that the ground screws can't do. So in a case like this, where you have solar, this actually is in a pig farm, and a big consideration here, just by the way, is the ammonia from pig farms. We have it in other types of buildings as well. So we're into everything is stainless steel. All the cabling is protected. We need to be very careful in a situation like this. So all the gear is carefully selected. So that's really that. You can see here that the penetrations are carefully dealt with. And even you can see in the top corner here, the cables are actually ran in a PVC duct with stainless steel bracketry, and that you have a steel lined cable conduit, in this case, believe it or not, for rats and birds. Yeah, a little bit slower to install, but not the end of the world. Okay, what's next there? If you have any questions, guys, keep throwing them in there. John is putting them in front of me here. Sorry. Okay. So we spoke earlier about a kind of a flat roof system. There's different ways of putting it down. You can either ballast it down, which some roofs simply can't take. So what you end up putting down a flatter system like this is at just under 10 degrees of pitch, and you don't have to ballast it down because there's less chance that wind gets underneath it, especially in Ireland where it's facing south and our prevailing winds are coming from the south. But you can see there what the options are. Now there is a bit of wind protection. It was there anyway in this situation, and of course you can see heat pumps. That's that. So that's one method. So then, in terms of planning, do you want to go through that, John?
Yeah, I'll just go through it briefly. So again, to echo their enthusiasm for getting PV up on commercial and domestic, I suppose, as well. They've removed a lot of the obstacles associated with planning permission for commercial and domestic properties. So they have there are 43 solar safeguard zones. So they're all based around either airports or hospitals that might have helipads, and they've reduced the number of the panels that you can put up without planning permission within those zones. So the bigger ones are kind of 5 kilometers from the helipad or airport, and then the smaller ones are 3 kilometers, I think. So it's a fairly, there's a lot of space. I think I read somewhere that it takes up something like 3% of the land area. So you need to be quite unfortunate to fall into it where you're restricted. Outside of that, they're very free for you to install anything on your roof. So they kind of have made a call that if it's going on the roof, it's not extending or it's not deemed to be a new building. The ground mounted systems are slightly more restricted. So 75 meters squared of ground mounted systems requires planning. So they do obviously, because your ground mounted system, you're essentially building a new structure. So they're slightly more stricter on that planning. But any panels that you're putting on your roof, you can cover your roof without planning, provided you're outside of the solar safeguard zones. If you're within the solar safeguard zones, it's restricted to 300 meters squared, which is roughly around 150 panels, which is still quite a large system. So the restrictions for planning are very small, minimal. The only thing to say with that is heritage or architecturally conservation buildings, obviously they're a lot more particular about those. There's a specific report they want when you're putting in with planning to make sure that we've investigated all other options for providing that the panels could go somewhere else and not on the building, the nice building that's of significant architectural heritage. And even after that report, it's probably unlikely that they'll give it, depending on the building, but that they'll give permission to put panels up on your 150-year-old church or something like that.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, thanks. So we keep going. Some of this, guys, we wanted to put up some pictures here of, in this case, inverters kind of when it gets up into the large stuff, you're up into 100 kilowatt inverters there, which are kind of roughly a meter across, to give you an idea of scale. The fireman switch, not a great photo there of the fireman switch, but the fireman switch is essentially in the case that there's a fire or that there is a power outage, that take the fire scenario, they kill the power outside at the meter box. They come in, they start spraying water around the house, or they go in with their axe to do whatever they do, and all of a sudden they're meeting live wires because there's electricity coming from the solar panels. What the fireman switch, it's an important little part of the system. It has to be within very close proximity to the roof, so that there's very little exposed cable that is powered. But essentially what happens is when the power goes down to the house, whether it's fireman is after turning it off or there's a power outage, it actually will kill the electricity coming from the solar, right? And that's, you can't have a scenario where you potentially have 230 volts, or in industrial cases much higher, going back out the line, and there's a guy outside trying to fix it, not expecting 1,000 volts coming at him. So that's the fireman switch. It's the same in domestic. You have a fireman switch, and that's your little inverter at the bottom there. So if anybody has questions, we can come back to those. That's just to go into a little bit of the technical side of it. I'm pretty much probably at the end of it there, unless we've any questions. We've upcoming webinars. The next one, this is for heat pumps. Now again, this is probably for domestic. Well, it is for domestic. We're getting a bit of pushback on heat pumps, partly driven by, I suppose, the high electricity costs we've experienced there over the last 2 years. They're obviously starting to come down now, but we talk about the common mistakes. Why are heat pumps running at whatever 2,000 when on the box they were supposed to be running at €700 a year? We talk about the common mistakes, very simple mistakes that treble, or in some severe cases quadruple, the expected running cost. Because we all view a heat pump as this magic box, of course it gets blamed no matter what happens. The reality is the pipes are probably too small going to the house. The floor coverings are wrong. The radiators are too small. There's radiator covers. The pumps are too small. The controls don't allow the heat pump to operate efficiently, or whatever it is. Or the homeowner is simply told, don't touch that heat pump. You're never again to go near it. You're supposed to leave it on all the time. And so all of those things lead to, I suppose, extortionate running costs in some cases. So we talk about the case studies of where we do things right and where we get, a 200 square meter house running at €700 a year. And it's a twin house, which is a series of seemingly small, innocuous mistakes running at $2,000 a year. Okay, so we talk about that. And we'll actually, in the next one, we're going to put in a section in that. Okay, now that I can understand if I was building a house, or if I was going retrofitting a house, how I could do it right. If I had it already finished and I've done it wrong, what do I do now? That's a more difficult conversation, of course, because in some cases there's nothing. Maybe floor coverings or something might be a big culprit with underfloor heating. And we go through the science of that. We talk about the heat flux per square meter coming out of various types of floor coverings, etc. And how does it affect heat pumps, running them at 100 miles an hour? Like, we know that driving a car at 100 miles an hour doubles the running cost. Nobody knows what that equates to in heat pump world. Well, we have the data and the science behind it. We're happy to go through it. So your customers are happy to come to that as well, or we're happy to invite them. It's okay, we'll be showing a little bit of the science, but it'll be the layman's take on it. So there's 2 of them between now and Christmas. Exhaust air heat pump for professionals. We have again on the 1st of November. Exhaust air small heat pumps for very small houses, very well insulated houses, or most likely apartments. Okay. And then we have on the 6th of December, we have one-stop shop, pros, cons, and alternatives. We talked through the case studies there. Again, as I said at the start, we talked there about the one-stop shop, but the alternative program is the CEG. For the projects that are not suited to the one-stop shop, the CEG is, I would say, we're using it in 50 to 60% of the projects. It's a much more flexible contractual arrangement with all of the same grants attached to it for the homeowner. So they can use their own contractors largely. They're not tied to a one-stop shop. So that's the calendar between now and the date there is wrong. Seminars 2023. Johnny getting fired for that one. But the calendar is correct. So you'll find that in the bottom of our website, ashgrove.ie. Is there any questions we need to deal with, John?
Just I've answered some of them that were kind of project specific. Panels that we use for commercial are the same as domestic, or is there different sizes or whatever it is? So I suppose you can go bigger, or the ammonia factor to take into account as well.
Yeah, if we had something like ammonia or something there, or anything where there was chemicals or something that we'd be worried about, we go to what's known as a glass panel. It's when I say glass now, none of them are actually strictly speaking glass, but it's in the domestic panel that we use. It's essentially a strong plastic front on it. We call it glass. It's not, but on the back of that, behind the wafers, it's essentially a membrane. But if we had ammonia or something like that, we go to glass as well at the back. It's a more expensive panel by about 15%. There's no need to use it in domestic, but in big systems like that, sometimes we would go to glass. There is a thing called a bifacial panel. That's a different thing. A bifacial would be where, if you can imagine, there's solar cells on either side of the panel. We would only use that in something like a field where the sunlight that doesn't hit the panel will reflect up onto the bottom of the panel, and we pick up that energy at the back. Okay, that's a bifacial, not to be mixed up with glass. And obviously, if I have that panel on the roof of a house or a roof of a commercial building, the bifacial doesn't work because there's nothing being reflected into the back of it. Okay, so we wouldn't use that there. In terms of size or efficiency, there are more expensive and more efficient panels. Our kind of standard panel today is somewhere between, depending on the project and the size, somewhere between kind of 410 to 450 or 470 watts per panel. You can get them up to probably 700 or 800 watts per panel, and they're marginally bigger, not an enormous amount bigger, but there are places where extra size probably suits. But you're paying an extra bit for the output. They're more efficient and probably have a longer life. So yes is the answer. We might use slightly different, but equally, we might have a scenario in a house where we can't get up enough small panels, or if you can imagine that the roof is whatever 5 meters long, and I have two 1.8 panels or something like that. I can't get a third one, even though I have in my head a meter left, so I might use slightly bigger panels. It might be slightly more expensive, but I end up making better use of the roof. So there would be scenarios where I might go for the more expensive panel. I would say it's unusual, being honest, but it's a possibility.
I think everything else is covered.
Okay.
Really,
well, that's recovered. So guys, I've nothing else to say. Is there anything we wanted to add to?
No, just
okay. I suppose just to reiterate, I know it's for not for commercial solar, but for anything that's home energy related or app.
From the Play Store and iOS.
Yeah.
So whatgrant.ie.
Yeah, whatgrant.ie, or if you search for Ashgrove, it'll pop up as well. And it's all videos. You can share it with your customers. It explains the intricacies without going into too much detail, the benefits of the various grants, maybe the cons of some of them, why you wouldn't use them in a certain place, and ultimately it points them to those webinars. Again, it's free information, and hopefully it's of use to you guys. After that, come back to us for CPD points for any of you who want it. If you want a copy of this presentation, I'm happy to send it out, or we're happy to send it out. And if you have any queries, be sure to send them in. Thank you again for your support. We can see some of the names there, the usual suspects. We appreciate it. But that's it. We look forward to talking to you soon, and thanks for your time. Take care. Bye.